Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why your memory of something can get a little fuzzy or even change when you see something similar afterward? Well, this new study dives deep into exactly that. It turns out that how clear or uncertain we are about something we remember can dramatically change how it is influenced by new information, sometimes even leading us to completely swap the memory for something else. So, the big idea here is about something called similarity-induced memory bias. Imagine you are trying to remember the exact direction of some moving dots. Then, during the time you are supposed to be holding that memory, you see another set of moving dots. If those new dots look a bit like the ones you are trying to remember, your original memory might get pulled towards the new ones. This new research explores how sure or uncertain you are about that first memory, and the new dots affects how much this pull happens. They did this with 2 experiments using moving dots where they could change how clear or coherent the motion looked. Think about your visual working memory, that mental workspace where you hold on to things you are seeing right now, like remembering where you parked your car. It is pretty amazing how well it works. But, as this research suggests, it is not perfect. Sometimes things you see while you're trying to remember something can actually change your memory. This is especially true if the new thing seems similar to what you are trying to remember. This similarity-induced memory bias, or SIM, is what the researchers are really digging into here. They're asking, what if your memory itself isn't super clear to begin with? How does that uncertainty play a role when you get new similar information? It is like trying to remember your cat's specific meow, and then you hear a dozen other cats meowing. If you are not super sure about your cat's unique sound, those other meows might start to blend in or even change how you remember your own cat's meow. The key to this study is this idea of stimulus certainty. They use dot motion stimuli, like those videos where you see a bunch of dots moving and some move in a clear direction while others move randomly. The clearer the direction is, the more coherent the motion, and the more certain you are about that direction. If the motion is very random, it is less coherent, and you are less certain what the actual direction is. In their first experiment, they had people try to remember a direction of dot motion. Then, during the time they were supposed to hold that memory, they showed them another set of moving dots. They made it so that the clarity or coherence of both the target dots you were remembering and the distracting dots were manipulated together. So if the original dots were hard to see clearly, the new dots were also hard to see clearly. And vice versa. They wanted to see if low clarity, meaning high uncertainty, made the memory more likely to be biased by the similar new dots. Basically, they had participants look at the screen. A set of dots would appear, moving in a certain direction. Participants had to remember that direction. Then there was a short break, and sometimes another set of dots would appear briefly. After all that, the participant had to report the direction of the original dots they were supposed to remember. They also had to say how confident they were in their memory, and importantly, whether the second set of dots looked similar or dissimilar to the first. They changed how clear or coherent the motion was for the dots. When the coherence was low, the motion looked more random, making it harder to tell the exact direction. When it was high, the direction was very clear. They looked at the errors people made in reporting the direction. They calculated how much the reported direction was pulled towards the direction of the second, distracting dots. This pull is the similarity-induced memory bias. They also used a fancy statistical method called mixture modeling to figure out if the errors were just a slight bias or shift towards the distracting dots, or if people were actually swapping the memory of the target dots for the distracting dots entirely. Think of bias as leaning towards something and the swap as completely replacing it. And here is what they found. When the motion of the dots was less clear, meaning people were less certain about the direction they were supposed to remember, they were much more likely to be influenced by the second set of dots. Not only did their memory get pulled towards the new dots, but sometimes it looked like they completely swapped the new dots for the original memory. This happened most when the original dot motion was unclear, and when they judged the 2 sets of dots as similar. This suggests that uncertainty really makes your memory a more wobbly, easily influenced thing. They also confirmed that low dot motion coherence really messed with people's confidence. When the dots were harder to see, people reported being less sure about their memory, and their actual recall was less precise, meaning their reported direction was more scattered. This was true even when they tried to focus only on the times they said they were highly confident. So, low certainty definitely means less precise memory. Crucially, they saw that when people judged the target and non-target dots as similar, the bias towards the non-target was bigger when the motion coherence was lower. Basically, the less certain you were about the original memory, the more it was pulled towards the new similar information. This effect was stronger when the 2 dot directions were closer together. It really highlights that uncertainty is a big player in this memory bias. And that mixture modeling, it revealed something really interesting. The errors weren't just simple pools. Often, it was a combination of bias and actual swaps, where people seemed to report the memory of the distracting dots instead of the original ones. This was especially true when people judged the dots as dissimilar, but the coherence was low. Or in many similar conditions, they even started calling this phenomenon SIMBAS for similarity-induced bias and swaps, because swaps turned out to be a significant part of the story, not just a simple bias. Now, in experiment 1, they changed the clarity of both the target and the distracting dots at the same time. But they couldn't tell for sure if it was the uncertainty of the original memory or the uncertainty of the new dots that mattered more. So, in experiment 2, they changed things up. They made it so they could manipulate the clarity of the target dots and the distracting dots independently. This allowed them to tease apart which one was more important. The setup was pretty similar, but this time they could have, for example, a very clear target dot motion and a very blurry distracting dot motion, or vice versa, or both clear or both blurry. They kept the distances between the dot directions a bit smaller. What did they find? The clarity of the target dots was the key player. When the original memory target was uncertain, meaning low coherence, the similarity-induced memory bias was much larger. The clarity of the distracting dots didn't have as much of an effect. This is super important. It means that your memory being uncertain makes it more vulnerable to being influenced by other things. Especially when those things seem similar, it is not just about the new information being strong, it is about your own memory being weak. This experiment really hammered home that it is the uncertainty of the thing you are trying to remember that makes it susceptible. When the target had low coherence, the bias towards the non-target was larger. This was true regardless of whether they thought the dots were similar or dissimilar, though the nature of the bias changed. And again, the mixture modeling showed that both bias and swaps were involved. On similar trials, it was usually a mix, but on dissimilar trials, the outcome depended on the target's coherence. If the target was clear, it was mostly bias. But if the target was unclear, swaps became more prominent. This suggests that when your memory is shaky, you are more likely to completely exchange it for something else that is presented. So, what does all of this mean? The main takeaway is that stimulus certainty, or in simpler terms, how clear and unambiguous information is, plays a huge role in how our visual working memory is affected by new inputs. When our memories are uncertain, they're like a shaky foundation, easily swayed by similar external information. This sway can be a subtle shift, or in more extreme cases, a complete replacement of the original memory with the new information. The researchers made a really cool observation too. In previous studies, they usually only saw an attraction bias when things were judged similar. But here, they saw attraction to the non-target when things were similar, and a repulsion away from the non-target when things were deemed dissimilar. This adds another layer to understanding these memory biases. They think this might be specific to motion stimuli like dot motion, or perhaps it is because they could directly link the similarity judgment to the underlying patterns of error. Now, it is important to remember that research is a process. The authors point out that due to how they aggregated data for the complex mixture modeling, they couldn't do as detailed within-subject comparisons as they might have liked. Future work could try to get more detailed data per Pascal participant in those tricky modeling situations. Ultimately, this study provides compelling evidence that uncertainty is your visual working memory's Achilles heel. When your memory is already fuzzy, new, similar information can hijack it, not just tweaking it, but sometimes completely replacing it. This has implications for everything from how we form memories of events to how we learn and make decisions in an information-rich world. Where so much of what we experience is noisy and uncertain, it highlights that understanding the certainty of our memories is just as important as understanding the content itself. So next time you're trying to recall something and you see something that looks a bit like it, remember that your memory might be more fragile than you think, especially if you are already feeling unsure about it. What are your thoughts on this? Does this explain why you sometimes misremember details? Especially when you are tired or stressed, let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, give this video a like, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of the mind, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into science. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.